You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Get on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me, as always, I have my co-host and good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, how you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well, feeling rejuvenated after a 3-day weekend. Got to go up to Decorah, Iowa, which is absolutely beautiful. You know, a lot of limestone bluffs. They have 2 awesome breweries, good camping, and got to go kayaking as well on the Upper Iowa River, which was beautiful. We had great weather. Storms, luckily, I got to miss there was tornadoes in Iowa City, and I was heading up to Decorah when that happened. So that was actually a little frightening. The fiance was back in Iowa City still. She met us up the next day. But, yeah, pretty good weekend. How about yourself?
I was good, man. I got back from Boston. I tried to go burn down Gillette Stadium, but it didn't happen. Sorry, guys. It's still there. And but no, I got back, got to have a chance with my daughter just to hang out for a couple days, and we just kind of relaxed, and it was really nice. It's been a while since I've just had a couple days of just pretty much nothing. And we usually do a lot on Memorial Day, but we didn't this year. And I mean, as much as I like to go out and kind of be a part of those services and all those kind of things, it was kind of nice to stay home and sleep in a little bit.
That really is underrated. Like a whole weekend where you just don't even leave. You know, you're just stuck at home.
Yep.
Especially in when it's bad weather, which we have had terrible weather here in Iowa. And I'm sure, have you been getting hit? You said you were in Boston. Have you guys been getting hit as hard as we have? Yeah,
we got, what'd they say? I think we had 6 or 7 inches when I was gone of rain. And then when I got back, we had 4 inches of rain just 2 nights ago. And so fields are flooded. I don't know if our country people can even get out of their house yet. And I mean, it's been pretty crazy. We've avoided all the tornadoes and hail and everything else, thankfully. But no, the rain, my backyard's a swimming pool right now.
Hey, who needs to pay for an in-ground pool when you got Mother Nature doing it?
I know. Thank you, Mother Nature.
Granted, all the nitrates and stuff from the field runoff, probably not the best. But hey, maybe if your daughter grows a third appendage, she might be able to get a football scholarship or something.
I'll take it.
You know, like that. But yeah, no, it was fun. It was the river was actually pretty high in Decorah as well. I had to do a little bit of rescue missions with some tip kayaks, but it's not the worst. It's not too bad, and I can swim and whatnot, and I've kayaked plenty of times, so not the worst, but really good, and back to the grind now, and the wedding barreling down now. So that'll be good. Yeah, it's coming up. I'm actually going to be heading out to Colorado with the fiance and her mother coming up here in mid-June to finalize all our wedding stuff, and then that'll be good. So ready for football, ready for all that stuff, and going to be plenty busy between now and then.
Oh, I understand, man. And I'm excited for you on that. And I'm excited to talk some football with you here today. And, of course, I want to make sure that all of our listeners can find us. You can find me on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH. And, of course, you can find Nick at Nick Kendell MHH. And you can follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod. And make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating as we value your input. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and the CBS Sports Digital, to find ours and our co-writers' articles and all things pertaining to your Denver Broncos. If you enjoy our show, make sure you head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, where Building the Broncos along with Huddle Up are found under the Huddle Up podcast. This podcast is powered by Overtime Media. Well, before we get to our actual football conversation here today, I just wanted to kind of say I had a cool experience this week. I had a local newspaper hear about me getting to do these podcasts and write for Mile High Huddle and all those kind of things. And so they asked if they could do an article on me. And I was thinking of you, Nick, because they gave me about 25 questions, and it took me about 3 or 4 hours to type it all out. And I seriously think it will be the entire newspaper if he uses everything. So I even asked him, I said, do you want any more? He's like, no, please, no more. So.
I don't know what's more shocking, that they asked, somebody like little old you the little preacher from Kansas. No, I'm just kidding. To run a story, or the fact that newspapers still exist. That's a shock. I thought that was just on the internet.
I live in cowboy country where they still like their paper, and not everybody's quite up to speed on the internet or anything like that.
Yeah.
But no, we got 2 newspapers in my town, if you could believe it. We have 1,200 people and 2 newspapers.
That's pretty awesome.
I know. And anyway, the guy that asked me to do this, he was the one that hooked me up with talking to Dalton Reisner, and is a huge Broncos fan. And so if he's listening right now, thank you for including me in your newspaper this week, and had a lot of fun writing that out. But no, it's always kind of exciting just to see other people seeing the things that you're doing and wanting to recognize you for it a little bit, I guess. And so if any of our listeners are new ones because of that article, welcome. And I get ready for some interesting conversations about football and everything about life. And we get into some weird places, I guess you could say. We go down some rabbit holes that you never would expect. But no, it's always a lot of fun. And I'm excited about our topic today. Maybe exciting is not the right word, because this does kind of mean people losing their jobs possibly. And we want to talk a little bit about some roster bubble players, some guys that right now, last year probably you would have never thought these guys would be losing their job. This year, they're going to have to really make a huge impact to make the coaches want to keep them on the team. And so let's just get right into this. Who is your first guy that you think, man, I'm really going to struggle to see him making this roster this year?
Well, I'm totally going to shock everybody with my first one. Actually, just kidding. If you have listened to this podcast before, you know anything about me, and the brand is strong. DeMarcus Walker is my first guy on the roster bubble for the Broncos, and he's been a guy that, even since he was drafted, I wasn't a big fan of the selection. I thought he was a 5th-round talent taken in the mid-second round, and there was plenty of other options around him that I would have gone with, and that's making me look pretty good at this point. Granted, that's the draft and evaluating players is as much luck as it is skill. But yeah, DeMarcus Walker, he's a guy that his skill set, I just never was that big of a fan of. He had all those statistics in college. He was a guy who put up a good amount of sacks and pressures, but he never looked like a guy that was winning with the traits, if that made sense. So he's a guy that a lot of cleanup sacks, whether the quarterback's holding onto the ball long, or one-on-one chances, or secondary moves where he's getting after the quarterback, where there is some value to that, but it needs to be complementary. And same thing in the NFL. Never really seen him being a guy who's getting after the quarterback quickly, good burst, good initial ability, and he has that tweener frame. He's not explosive enough and good enough at initial point of a contact to get away with being a 6'4", 280-pound interior defensive lineman. That's probably one of the reasons that they originally tried to play him at edge, but he doesn't have the bend or the burst, especially, to play that true edge with especially a 2-point stance ability. So, yeah, I don't think he's a guy that's long for this roster, and I know that there's been people talking about how he looked pretty solid in OTAs, but to me, that's fluff. It's fun to hear about, but how many years in a row did we hear about, Cody Latimer killing it in OTAs and even, training camp, and then nothing in the regular season. So I'm really waiting to see with that, and further to hammer it home, they brought in a guy who's pretty much the exact level or the exact type of player that you'd see DeMarcus Walker being in Draymond Jones. 6'3", 285 pounds, not a great guy against the run, but a quick interior penetrator and pass rusher. So DeMarcus Walker, his skill set, and how many of those guys can you actually have on the interior? Fangio typically has had, although he does play a one-gapping scheme, he's had some bigger-bodied guys on the interior. So you're going to carry Draymond Jones and DeMarcus Walker? I don't see it.
Right.
So, yeah, for me, I think DeMarcus Walker, he's a guy that's not long for the roster, and he would have to really do something in preseason to make me change my mind from that.
Who was I would say the guy that always got hyped up during OTAs and then did nothing? and this maybe shows my age here a little bit, but Jarvis Moss. I remember when they were not in pads, he was that guy that everybody was talking about of, oh my goodness, he just looks so fast on the field. And then once the pads came on, he was nothing. I mean, the guy, for being a first-round pick, ended up with 6 sacks for his NFL career, and that was 6 years, so a sack a year.
That was the 4 draft pick draft, right?
Was that what it was?
They had like Marcus Thomas and another edge rusher that they took. Like there was only 4 draft picks. I can't remember where they traded them all away for, but that was a bad draft class.
Yes, that definitely was. But that's who I always think of when we're talking about guys that never quite live up to the hype and show a little bit when the pads are off and then become nothing. And you're right, it was the 4. They had Tim Crowder, Ryan Harris, and Marcus Thomas. So
Ryan Harris. Good job, Harris.
Yep, one player. He was the saving grace of that draft. But no, yeah, I'm with you. I can't see DeMarcus Walker making this roster. He's going to have to absolutely just show something that he has never shown in his life. He's going to have to come in shape that he's never been in his life because, I mean, you already said it. When you have Draymond Jones, who is very similar in what they wanted Walker to be, but actually can do it. I mean, there's a big difference. When you watch Draymond Jones, he has plays where you're just sitting there saying, oh my gosh, that was incredible. DeMarcus Walker, there's a lot of sacks, like you said, that are clean up, where it's 3, 4, 5 seconds into the play, and you're going, that's great. That's a sack, but is it really a sack for him, or is it really a sack for the secondary?
It's like a system sack.
Right. And I mean, I appreciate that he is one of those guys that keeps fighting throughout a play, but that only gets you so far when it comes to the NFL. And so right now, I'm with you. I don't see him being a Denver Bronco this season, and good luck wherever you end up. But, man, it's just the numbers-wise, the numbers crunch of where the Broncos roster is at. I mean, you got your 3 for sure starters, Derek Wolfe, Shelby Harris, Adam Gotsis making this roster. You got Draymond Jones for sure making this roster. Zach Kerr is probably going to make this roster. And so it kind of depends, how many do they keep? That's up in the air a little bit. Do you keep 6? Well, then he's fighting with Billy Wynn, Mike Purcell, Ahmad Gooden, all those kind of guys. And I know they're not huge names, but at least a guy like Billy Wynn, he's done more than Walker has in his NFL career.
Yeah. And let this be a lesson for everybody who's like in the draft community or just casual fans who are, trying to get to know some of these draft prospects. DeMarcus Walker's senior season on the box score looks good. I mean, 45 solo tackles, 67 total tackles, 19.5 tackles for loss, and 16 sacks. That's 3 forced fumbles. That's awesome. That's really good.
Yeah.
But the attributes that you see on tape are not there. And, I mean, the ACC has been trending downward. Hopefully no ACC fans on here listen against me. I mean, as a whole, the conference has. Clemson is absolutely incredible. Clemson and Bama. But outside of that, I mean, the Florida States, the Miamis, the Virginia Techs, not great. Not great. So, I don't know. Like, I know he's a Power 5 guy. He was ACC Defensive Player of the Year in 2016, one-time All-American. Good stats, but it comes down to what you see on the traits and how those traits translate. So just let that be a lesson to be wary of box score scouts out there. You see people talking about this guy ran for so many yards or had this many tackles. Well, it matters, but like in the grand scheme of things, it's not what matters most. So I'll get off my soapbox so you can kick it over to you.
No, you're right. You're completely right. This is where film trumps box scores.
Traits trump stats.
Right, exactly. And it's why some guys just don't put up great stats in college, but yet become stars in the NFL. And other guys put up some of the most ridiculous stats in college and then can't do anything in the NFL. One doesn't always mean the other. And it's something you always have to keep an eye on, and why we always you and I love to watch as many games as we can of a player to really get a better feel of what they're actually doing on the field. And speaking of that, here's another guy that had some great moments in college. That's my first guy, and that's Su'a Cravens. I mean, these are I think, two most obvious of the veterans that are going to really struggle to make this roster. And Su'a Cravens, he's one of those guys that he now has 2 coaching staffs that have given up on him. And now he's on pretty much his third and final opportunity, I think. And he's got some athleticism. Like I said, put up some big stats in college. Again, another second-round pick. And a guy that just never quite lived up to the hype. And he's struggled to fight through injuries. I mean, you saw at Washington, he just pretty much gave up on his team and kind of badmouthed everybody along the way, not shown to be a great locker room kind of guy. You and I have heard that he is maybe more interested in his music career than he is his NFL career. And there's just a lot of things working against him. He's not a great film junkie. He's just the little things. When we're talking about death by inches, when we're talking Vic Fangio and what he loves to see in his players, Su'a Cravens is not that guy. He is one that has relied on his instincts and his athleticism to get him where he is now. But in the NFL, it takes much more than that. You got ridiculous athletes all over the place. I mean, everybody on the field is an athlete. So now you got to have something that separates you, and Su'a Cravens hasn't shown that. And I just can't see him all of a sudden having things just click. Now, I do hear that he's up to 235 because I think he sees if he's probably going to make this roster, it's going to be more as a nickel linebacker than as a safety.
Yeah. I mean, you got Jamal Carter fighting for him with the spot. You got Trey Marshall and honestly Will Parks. I mean, all kind of similar players. So yeah, it's gonna be hard for Su'a Cravens to make this team. And even, it's the off season, so I guess we can kind of talk a little bit of gossip, but there's some talk that, I mean, there's questions about how much he actually likes football, how much he cares about football. It is a grind. We've seen guys like, I think it was David Irving of the Cowboys, who just recently quit over Instagram Live while smoking a joint and playing video games. Maybe, I think I saw Paxton Lynch in the background. No, I'm just kidding. Don't start that rumor. But yeah, there's like, how much does he want it? And it's easy for me to be where I'm at to question him. I get that. But with Washington discarding him for very little after a very short time period, and then last season with the Broncos, I know he wasn't healthy, but even then there was talk about like issues with him in the film room and the weight room. And I mean, I've even heard from a source that, Su'a Cravens is more interested in his rap career than his football career. So you put all that together, woof, like, yikes. And you think Vance Joseph was a guy who could probably suffer some fools. I mean, we've seen the videos with him with the Bolin son, or is it the Bolin son? There's really drunk and kind of weird videos with them.
Yep.
I'm talking about that's uncomfortable. But do you think Vance Joseph is going to put up with a guy that's, not putting it out there and focusing on his own brand and rap career instead of putting it in on the football field and in the weight room and in the film room? Heck no. So it seems like a position where they might go with somebody who makes more sense depth-wise, cheaper-wise. I mean, you don't have any dead money left on the Cravens deal. They never did because of the trade, I believe, because Washington's paying them all that signing bonus. And I'd rather keep a guy who offers more special teams-wise, who's a better leader and pushing guys around him in the weight room, in the locker room, in the film room. And heck, even better in the community. That's something that I would weigh in if it comes down to it at that point. So Cravens for me, yeah, another one. I filled this out before you did my 3 guys, but I left him on there. And if you weren't going to bring him up, I was going to switch one of my guys to him, but I couldn't. I always feel a little guilty taking every single low hanging fruit. So the DeMarcus Walker and Su'a Cravens, I agree with you. Those are the 2 guys where it's like, I would bet against him at this point. We'll see. I mean, obviously we're pulling for them. It's better for the Broncos if they stand out and like, wow, they realize their second round draft potential. That'd be amazing to make the team better. But everything we've seen, everything we've heard, pushing it the other way. All right. Well, we're still going to talk about 4 more guys that we have on our own roster bubble, but we're going to take a quick break.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. I am Nick Kendell along with Carl Dumler, and we are discussing roster bubble players on the current roster. We've covered DeMarcus Walker, we've covered Su'a Cravens, and I'm going to kick it back to Carl here for his next guy who he believes is on the roster bubble as it pertains to making the final 53 for the Denver Broncos.
Well, and I find it interesting just looking at our list of guys that we have here. We got 4 more players, and 3 of them, if you design the roster right now, would most likely be starters on this Broncos team. And yet here we have them as roster bubble players. And it's for many different reasons that each of these guys fall into this. But my guy here is Jeff Heuerman. And I know some people are going to sit there and say, oh, my goodness, what? We just signed him to a contract. Why in the world would we cut him or trade him or whatever you want to say? Well, there's a couple reasons. One, his contract is not all that big. I mean, we're talking he's making $3 million in cap number this year, and only $2 million of that is actually fully guaranteed. And so in the grand scheme of things, when you're looking at the entire cap situation and where the Broncos are at, it's not that big of a hit. Second, the Broncos have a lot of young players at that tight end position. I mean, you're talking obviously Noah Fant, the first round pick. But then you got Jake Butt, and the Broncos have been hoping that this guy could really finally stay healthy. And if he can stay healthy and show it on the field, and I know we just said, hey, don't read anything into OTAs, but he has been performing well in OTAs. And then you have Troy Fumagalli, who they drafted last year, who was injured the entire year. If those 2 guys all of a sudden start showing really well, it maybe makes Jeff Heuerman a little bit more of a easier cut. And it's not because of what he's doing on the field, but it's maybe because of what other people are doing on the field. Now, I do actually expect Jeff Heuerman to make the roster, but I just wanted to include him on this list just to kind of show a little bit of maybe where the Broncos are at. If they do cut him, it's maybe more of about the future, where the Broncos see guys like Jake Butt, Troy Fumagalli, Noah Fant as the future and wanting to get them as many snaps on the field this year to get them ready more for that 2020 season. I mean, you and I have talked about this quite a bit. We don't exactly see the Broncos as Super Bowl contenders this year. There would have to be a lot of things that go right for them to be a Super Bowl contender. And so right now it's more looking at that 2020. What are you building towards? Well, I don't really see Jeff Heuerman as the future at the tight end position. I mean, obviously Noah Fant's going to be the future at the position, but even in that second, third spot, I see them still working to try to upgrade those spots. Now, maybe they already have that on the roster in Jake Butt and Troy Fumagalli, but it's still one of those things where Jeff Heuerman, we've seen what he is. When he's healthy, he has some good moments. He's a pretty good inline blocker, and he has some ability as a catcher, all those kind of things. But he's not a star. He's not anything that you're just sitting there saying, oh, my gosh, let's build the tight end position around this guy. I mean, it's why they used a first-round pick on Noah Fant. But I don't know. There's a lot of things that if certain things line up, I could see Jeff Heuerman being off this roster.
Yeah, I am in agreement with you. I mean, right now he has the 25 highest cap hit for any tight end in the NFL, 23rd highest cash amount, and 22nd highest average. And if they cut him, it's $1.5 million dead this year, only $0.5 million in the grand scheme of the cap, only $0.5 million dead cap in 2020. So it makes a lot of sense. And for Heuerman, I think it depends on as much, not only, how he does in this new system and the team and whatnot, but the guys around him. I mean, Noah Fant, how quickly does he grasp the new playbook? How quickly can he be implemented into the offense and get accustomed to the speed of the NFL game? Can Jake Butt stay healthy? Again, with the OTAs, you heard that he was making some plays and looking good out there, but the multitude of injuries that he's had, can he be dependent on? How quickly can he be ready? And then you got Troy Fumagalli as well, another guy, total unknown as far as the NFL game. So we'll see. And the big thing with me for Heuerman, the argument I'd make to not move on from him would be his blocking proficiency. Now, he isn't an elite blocker by any means. I wouldn't go that far, but as far as the Broncos go, I would say he's the best blocking tight end the team has on the roster. And, the run game, it's mattering less and less in today's NFL. Pass game matters more, but we've seen with Kyle Shanahan that he likes to use a lot of max protections and keep the tight end in there to block, especially 21 personnel, 12 personnel, and that's something that Heuerman can do better than any other Bronco on the roster at this point as far as tight end goes. So it will be interesting, but if it comes down to it and the math works out that way, I mean, this Chris Karras Jr. contract that sounds like it's coming down the tracks could totally change the numbers as well. I mean, we might be talking about guys like Todd Davis needed to be moved on from just to make room for this 1-year deal. So it'll be interesting to see the ramifications of that. But I'm with you. I think Heuerman's a guy that I don't think he's off the roster when it comes down to it, but he's definitely one who needs to be looking over his shoulder.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have it as a 75% chance that he makes this roster, which is pretty high.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of things for a veteran like him. But it's still just a guy that you got to keep an eye on. If he's struggling a little bit and some of the other guys are making some noise, it really is one of those the Broncos could just decide it's not worth moving forward with him. And he could be one of those nice little, pick up a late round pick kind of guys. A team has a couple tight ends go down in training camp. Hey, let's talk to the Broncos about Jeff Heuerman. You get a 6th or 7th round pick. I mean, that there's so much that has to play into all this kind of stuff. But, I mean, it's still something to monitor. And that kind of brings us to your guy then, another guy that right now most people expect to be a starter, but he could be on the roster bubble. Who is that for you?
Yeah, a guy that, honestly, if it wasn't for the injury, I think he would have been a cap casualty, and that is guard Ronald Leary. Ronald Leary has been an okay player for the Broncos when they brought him in. I don't know if it was when we were first starting the podcast, it was 2 years ago, 2 off seasons ago, and the Broncos brought in Ronald Leary, and I thought it was a solid move, but there was a guy I wanted much more than him. Do you remember who that was?
Say that again?
There was a guy that I wanted to sign much more than Ronald Leary because of injury concerns and the value of guard.
I can't remember.
It was Andrew Whitworth.
Oh, yes.
I really wanted to pay Andrew Whitworth so that way you weren't totally obligated to take a tackle round 1 in the NFL draft. So that way they could maybe take my guy, who I really liked at the time, O.J. Howard. How things could have been different. Who knows? But yeah, Ronald Leary, they signed him and finished the last 2 seasons on the injury report, on injured reserve. And the older guy, I mean, he's coming up right now on his, I think he's 30, on his age 30 season, 7th year in the league. And he does have the injury guarantee, but I mean, the further we get away from his injury, the more likely he is to pass a physical. And so the Broncos, if they move on from him after the post June 1st, they got a chance to save some serious cash. I mean, there is going to be some dead cap from it. There's a chance it could be, looking at it right now in front of me for 2019, post June 1st, $6 million dead cap, and they could have cap savings of $3 million. But if he can't play, maybe they'd be able to work out a settlement or something. But if he can't play, he can't play. And maybe they put him on the IR for the whole season. But still, they got to figure out a way to save some money. And hopefully Leary will be healthy, because looking at this depth chart on the interior offensive line, I mean, you got Sam Jones, McGovern, Wilkinson, and Dalton Reisner. And I know Donald Barkley was taking first team reps and getting absolutely abused in OTAs. And if that is worthy, because if a guy's absolutely looking horrible in OTAs, then they're probably not going to look good in the regular season either. So that's a concern for sure. But Ronald Leary, for me, he's a guy that, I wish he wouldn't have gotten injured for a multitude of reasons, but just for the flexibility, because of that injury, he's much, much less likely to be off the roster. But still, on the bubble.
Right. And I think one of the bigger reasons for him being on the bubble is he just is a terrible fit in zone scheme.
Yeah, he's much more of a get his hands on you and push you forward guy. Right.
And so I do worry a little bit. And I think some people have been questioning why in the world would the Broncos be looking at possibly having Dalton Reisner at left guard and moving over Ronald Leary. Well, I think it's a little bit because that left guard you hope is a little bit more athletic of the two. Because I know the Broncos, I just did an article actually breaking down why I think Dalton Reisner on the inside makes a lot of sense, and especially there at the left guard spot. And a big part of it is because they're not always going to run zone scheme. So there's going to be times where you're going to ask that guard to pull. And I really wonder how much Ronald Leary can actually even do that right now.
Yeah.
Coming off that Achilles injury at his age, has a degenerative knee issue that he's always had. There's just a lot of things that I question with that. So it makes a lot more sense to have Dalton Reisner at that spot and hope that he can really show up when they do some gap blocking opportunities. And I don't know. I'm with you. I don't know Ronald Leary. I could see him being starter for the team, or I could see him off the roster. It's just that I don't see. There's really nothing in between that, is there?
Probably not. Probably not.
I mean, you're not keeping a guy at his price as a backup. You could maybe PUP him and hope that he ends up coming back and being okay, but that's the only other way I could see him still making this roster and not being a starter day one.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. I wish he hadn't gotten hurt, because then it would be much easier to move on from him. So we'll see. But as far as the roster, let's say in a world where Ronald Leary isn't ready for the first 6 weeks, what is that interior offensive line looking like? Obviously, this is a prediction because we have very little to go off of. But what do you think it's looking like?
I'm going to go Bowles left tackle, Reisner left guard, McGovern center, Wilkinson right guard, Juwan James right tackle.
And that makes Sam Jones your swing guy inside?
Yeah. I just think Elijah Wilkinson did start last year some when they had injuries there at the right guard spot. And he wasn't great, obviously, but he at least has some starting experience. Yeah. And especially when you add in, you got yourself a great offensive line coach to work with him, and two, an entire offseason where that's his position. I could see him coming back, at least being a below average starter. I mean, I don't think he'll be average or above average or anything like that, but you can get around having a below average starter on the offensive line. You can have other guys help cover some of that up if the other guys are strong. And so I don't want to move a whole lot of players around a lot. I could see where Sam Jones goes in as center and they move McGovern back to right guard. That's another option that I could see the Broncos liking if the rumors of their love of Sam Jones is actually true.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's so hard to tell on that offensive line when none of these guys have worked with Musgraves. And I'm interested to see Munchak, to see how they do and see which ones grow the most under him.
Now you're completely correct there. So we'll see. Hopefully Ronald Leary can be healthy again and make some sort of contribution this season, because they need him based on the early returns and talk on the offensive line from OTAs. But we're going to get back here with two more guys that are on the roster bubble for us, but another break.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and we are back on the Building the Broncos podcast. I'm Nick along with Carl. We have two more guys to get on to here with the roster bubbles, and my first guy here is I don't know how surprised you are with this one, Carl, but I have Brandon McManus, the kicker for the Denver Broncos, and I don't think he's been a poor kicker, so to speak, but we've seen time and time again that Elway and Sullivan, the cap gurus and whatnot in the Broncos, they don't really want to pay specialists. And right now, Brandon McManus for 2019, he has the 6th highest cap hit for a kicker, the 13th highest cash, and 13th highest average. So he's a guy that, I mean, if he's been okay, but I don't think he's been the same player since that Super Bowl run. He's like the Joe Flacco of kickers, so to speak. He was amazing during that Super Bowl run. And then after that, he's been okay, debatable franchise kicker. But if you can move on for something that's cheaper, more cost effective, and get rid of that albatross of a contract, speaking for a kicker at least, that's something you might look into. So, wow, that just came to me on air, but that's what I'm going with right now. The Joe Flacco of kickers, probably better at golf. Apparently McManus is an amazing golfer. So you should actually hit him up that way.
I should.
But a guy that I could see them pushing him, and Tease has a chance to save the Broncos some cap. I mean, if they do cut him post June 1st, it's $1.25 million against the cap, dead cap this year, $1.25 next year, but they can save themselves $2.75, so nearly $3 million in the cap, and that could be the difference in paying Chris Harris Jr. and not paying Chris Harris Jr. and having that flexibility to pay some other guys. So Yeah, Brandon McManus, as much as having a good kicker can be, I mean, we've seen for as much as having not a bad kicker can be, and the difference between a win or a loss in a game. I mean, we've seen the issues with the Chicago Bears. I mean, they brought in pretty much everybody to compete for that position. They haven't found a viable guy there. But I could see the Broncos looking to pinch pennies, and that puts McManus, a guy that's potentially on the chopping block.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at his career, 2015, 2016 were his two best years with the Broncos. The last 2 years, he's seen actually quite a decline in what he's done. And I would say, especially when you're looking at some of those longer field goals, he was kind of brought in with that big leg, thinking he'd be great at those longer field goals, and he's not done great. He's been pretty bad at them lately, it seems like. And I think this moves a little bit more when they brought in a new kicker, or not really a new one. I guess they had him here last offseason too. And Taylor Bertolet, is that right?
I believe so.
And he tried to push McManus. McManus won the job. But it makes sense to continue to show him, hey, your job is not secure. I mean,
especially for the money.
Right. And there's a lot of teams out there that they might go through 3 or 4 kickers in a season. It's just one of those positions. There's a lot of guys on the free agent market that if your guy's not performing, you could cut them and still find a starter that's available on the market. And so I don't blame the Broncos for bringing in some competition to him against him. And if it's close, it really could come down to the numbers crunch. And right now, his contract could actually be very detrimental to his staying here with the Broncos. So I'm with you. I could see him being a little bit of a roster bubble guy. I do expect him to make the roster, but it wouldn't surprise me if after this season, they're looking to replace him even closer. Maybe even using like a late round draft pick to bring in a kicker. So kickers are one of those, if you have one of the top ones, you pay them. But if you don't have a top 3 kicker, there's no reason to really go pay him.
Yeah. It's another thing where they're going to look to potentially pinch some pennies. And if they can get a guy who, I mean, not even as good as McManus, but, better per dollar, that's something I think they'd look into. And so we'll see. I mean, the Broncos have a lot of guys that they're going to need to make decisions on next year. So starting to think ahead and cut some corners there and save some money that you can roll over, that might be that might help them. And again, we'll see how this Chris Harris contract makes an impact on these contracts of the guys already on the team. So we'll see.
All right. Well, that brings me to our final player of the day. And I wanted to go with a guy here that there's been a lot of Bronco fans getting pretty excited about his possibly being that breakout player that was on the practice squad this past season, got a few snaps during the season. And that's Jeff Holland. And I guess part of it is sometimes it's kind of like that third string undrafted quarterback that everybody hypes up and thinks that they're going to be something special, and then they really do nothing in the NFL. I think Jeff Holland kind of falls into that category of being a guy that you're just kind of going, he hasn't really done anything. I mean, he had some pretty good stats in college, not great, but good. He's a little bit on the smaller side of what you would like to see from that pass rusher spot. He's more of a pass rushing specialist than he is a full-time starter there at the outside linebacker spot. And right now, the Broncos brought in Justin Hollins, obviously, in the draft. They brought back Dakota Watson. They have Malik Reed is another guy that we've heard has been really kind of turning some heads there at OTAs. And so I think maybe some people should halt the brakes just a little bit. I could see Jeff Holland making the practice squad, but I'm not quite sure that he is that next breakout player that a lot of Bronco fans are hoping for. I hope so. I really hope so. I mean, we need it because after losing Shane Ray and Shaq Barrett, there's a huge hole there at that pass rushing backup spots. And I just still want to kind of halt the brakes a little bit on Jeff Holland and what he could mean to the Broncos this season. Yeah,
I mean, he's a guy that right now, third edge rusher. I mean, after Chubb and Vaughn, it's a lot of questions. We talked about that here before, but he's definitely not a guarantee to make this roster. I mean, there's a reason he was an undrafted free agent, and that's despite leading the SEC in sacks 2 years ago and playing for a high-profile program such as Auburn. So Malik Reed is going to push him, Aaron Wallace, Dakota Watson. We will see. I mean, maybe even Justin Hollins, although right now it looks like Hollins is trending towards that second level of defense, an off-ball linebacker, but we'll see. 6'5", 250. That's an interesting size for an off-ball linebacker. But I agree with you. I mean, definitely not a guy who is guaranteed to make this roster. That being said, if he ends up being the guy who's like top 3, top 4 in the Broncos in sacks next year, I would be equally unsurprised. You know, there's just a lot of variance in terms of what he might be doing next year. And honestly, we're getting to that point where I'm itching for new tape. So we'll see.
Yeah. I'm in complete agreement. We just don't know what he is.
Yeah.
And I just see a lot of people really getting on the hype train. And I guess I'll be one of the late ones to join if he does turn into something. I think sometimes we get a little bit too excited about some of those undrafted guys. Very seldom do we get a Chris Harris or a Shaq Barrett. Most of them do not turn into those kind of guys. I know the Broncos have a pretty good track record, but that's even there. That's 1 or 2 undrafted guys per year.
Yeah,
and that's good, but it's not. It's there. You still got about 20 other guys that do nothing.
Yep, indeed. All right. Well, any parting thoughts before we get out of here?
No, I just think when I'm looking at the Broncos roster, for the most part, I think you got a pretty good idea of who's making it. I mean, unless some people come in there and really shock some players, there's only a few positions that I'm sitting here saying I'm really questioning who's going to be 1 through 4, or whatever you want to say, or however many people they keep at certain positions. I am interested at the offensive line, who all wins those jobs for sure.
Yeah.
And then that pass rush spot, I am interested behind Chubb and Vaughn, because I mean that's going to play a very important role on what this team can do this season.
I'm with you there. One position that we didn't really talk about on here that I'm intrigued by is the wide receivers after the top 3 guys. I mean, Tim Patrick versus Juwan Winfrey versus Brendan Langley versus both like Trinity Benson, Calvin McKnight. So wide receiver is one that, the depth, it seems, wide open. Sutton, Sanders, and Hamilton, those guys are in. But after that, who knows? Aaron Burbridge, River Craycraft. I mean, we'll see. But it's one that could be anybody, really. And that's one of the reasons I'm already pushing him for the draft. So we'll see. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. You can find Carl on Twitter at Carl Dumler MHH and myself at Kendell MHH. Make sure you head on over to Mile High Huddle, an affiliate of 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports Digital, to find more content covering the Denver Broncos. Head on over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and a comment, as your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.